The afternoon sun shimmered across the pool's surface, turning the water into a sheet of light. I had come to swim alone, hoping to wash away the week's heaviness, the long hours at work, the endless noise of city life, the quiet loneliness that followed me home each night. The pool was my refuge. The world felt still except for the rhythmic splashes I made as I cut through the water. For a moment, everything was simple, until I heard the creak of the gate and the sound of footsteps approaching. When I looked up, Aaron, my neighbor from the next apartment, was standing at the edge of the pool. He was African, tall, and calm-eyed, with a voice that always carried quiet confidence. We'd spoken a few times before, mostly polite greetings in the hallway or while checking the mail. But I had never seen him here before. Didn't know you liked swimming, I said, catching my breath. That he smiled, dropping his towel on the chair. Didn't know you did either. There was an ease in his tone, the kind that makes conversation feel effortless. Soon, he slipped into the water beside me, and the pool that had felt vast and empty suddenly felt alive. For a few minutes, we swam in silence. Our strokes moved in rhythm, water rising and falling around us like soft applause. I couldn't tell if the sudden closeness made me nervous or comfortable, perhaps both. When we paused near the shallow end, Aaron leaned against the wall and said, "You come here often?" "Most weekends," I replied. "It's quiet here. Peaceful." He nodded. "I get that. Back home, water meant peace too." I wanted to ask more, where home was exactly, what his story was, but I held back. There was a certain mystery about him that I didn't want to break too quickly. Instead, I simply smiled and dove under again, letting the water mute the world for a few more seconds. As I surfaced, the air felt lighter, almost electric. Aaron was watching me, not in a way that made me uncomfortable, but in a way that said he noticed things, details, moods, small shifts. There was something grounding about that gaze. "You swim well," he said. "Thanks," I replied. "I used to train a bit in college." "You?" "Just for fun," he said. "But maybe you can teach me to be better." It was a simple exchange, yet it carried a weight neither of us named. The quiet between us wasn't empty, it was full of unspoken questions, the kind that hover between strangers who sense a connection forming too quickly. A light breeze passed over the water, scattering tiny ripples between us. Somewhere nearby, a child laughed, the echo bouncing off the tiles. Everything felt vivid, yet delicate, like the moment could dissolve if either of us spoke too loudly. Eventually, we sat by the pool's edge, feet dangling in the cool water. Aaron told me bits of his life, how he'd moved to the city for work, how different everything felt from his hometown, how sometimes he missed the sound of rain more than anything. That I listened, not just to his words but to his pauses, the quiet honesty that filled the spaces between them. There was a sincerity I hadn't heard from anyone in a long time. When he asked about me, I hesitated. I didn't know how to explain that my life felt safe but incomplete, that my days blurred into one another, that something in me was searching for connection but afraid to admit it. So instead, I said softly, "I guess I'm still figuring things out." He nodded, as if he understood more than I said. "Aren't we all?" The sun began to dip behind the buildings, and the sky turned gold and violet. The pool water caught every color, making it look like liquid glass. As we sat there, not speaking, I realized that sometimes a stranger can feel oddly familiar, like a mirror reflecting a part of yourself you didn't know existed. When we finally stood to leave, Aaron smiled again. "See you tomorrow?" I hesitated, then smiled back. "Maybe." But as I walked home, the word maybe echoed in my mind, carrying more meaning than I intended. The next day arrived with a quiet anticipation I couldn't ignore. Even before I reached the pool, I already knew he'd be there. I didn't know why, but something about the way Aaron had said, "See you tomorrow," felt like more than a casual invitation. It was a promise of continuity, and sure enough, there he was, leaning by the railing, sunlight cutting across his face, his towel folded neatly beside him. When our eyes met, he smiled with the kind of warmth that makes time slow down. "You came," he said. "I told you, maybe," I replied, trying to sound casual, though my heart was anything but. "Maybe" turned into "yes," he said with a grin. This time, the air between us was lighter, the awkwardness replaced by a quiet familiarity. We began to swim laps again, our rhythm finding its natural pace. The water shimmered like glass between us, and sometimes, when our paths crossed mid-stroke, I'd catch the flicker of his grin under the surface. After a few laps, we both stopped to rest, leaning on the pool's edge. Aaron looked at me thoughtfully. You ever notice how the pool feels different depending on who's in it? I raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? He smiled faintly. Some people make it feel like water. Others make it feel like air. It was one of those statements that made sense only when you felt it. And right then, I understood. The pool wasn't just a place to swim anymore, it was a space charged with quiet energy, shaped by two people learning to exist beside each other. That we spent more time talking than swimming that day. Aaron told me about the family he missed back home, about his mother who used to hum while cooking, and how he sometimes caught himself humming the same tune without realizing it. I told him about my routine, the way my days blurred together, how I'd forgotten what it felt like to be surprised by life. That he listened the way few people do, not to respond, but to understand. Later, we sat under the shade of a nearby umbrella, water still dripping from our shoulders, laughter blending with the soft hum of evening insects. Do you ever think about leaving? He asked suddenly. Leaving where? This life. This city. Starting somewhere new. The question hung in the air like a test I didn't know I was taking. I think about it, I said quietly. But I never do anything about it. Aaron nodded, looking out at the fading light. Maybe we don't have to run away. Maybe we just need to look differently at what's already here. I didn't answer right away. I was too busy noticing the sincerity in his expression, the kind that comes from someone who's wrestled with solitude and still chooses to see beauty in small things. When we finally stood up to leave, a light drizzle began to fall, the first of the season. The air smelled clean, earthy. Aaron didn't rush for cover, he simply looked up and let the rain touch his face. You don't mind the rain? I asked. That he shook his head. Where I come from, rain is a blessing. It reminds you you're alive. For reasons I couldn't explain, that line stayed with me long after I went home. The rain followed me too, tapping against the window as if echoing his words. That night, I couldn't sleep. My thoughts drifted between what was said and what wasn't. There was something about Aaron's presence that unsettled me, not in a bad way, but in a way that made me question what I was avoiding. Why did I look forward to seeing him? Why did the pool, once just a place to escape the noise, now feel like a bridge to something new? The next day, I woke up early, long before sunrise. I didn't even check the time. I just knew I had to go back. When I reached the pool, the water was still, mirroring the pale morning sky. I thought I was alone, until I heard his voice behind me. You're early today. I turned to see Aaron walking toward me, holding 2 mugs of coffee. I figured you'd be here, he said, handing me one. You seem like someone who doesn't like to wait for things to happen. I smiled, surprised at how well he saw through me. And you seem like someone who makes them happen. He chuckled softly. Maybe we're both learning. As we stood there, sipping coffee by the silent pool, I realized this was more than coincidence. It was the beginning of something, unclear, unspoken, but real, and though I didn't yet know what, then what he did, would mean, I felt, deep down, that whatever came next would change us both. The days that followed settled into an easy rhythm. Aaron and I began meeting at the pool almost every evening. It wasn't something we planned, yet somehow, we always arrived within minutes of each other. The pool had become our quiet place, a space between two lives that rarely intersected with anyone else's. That we swam less and talked more. Sometimes we discussed work, sometimes memories, and sometimes nothing at all. There were long stretches of silence where only the sound of water breaking between us spoke. But those silences said enough. One evening, as the golden light of sunset spilled across the pool tiles, Aaron seemed unusually quiet. His usual smile lingered only faintly, replaced by something more thoughtful. You ever feel like you're standing still, he asked, while the world keeps moving? I looked at him, unsure how to answer. Every day, I said after a pause. That he nodded slowly, eyes fixed on the water. That's why I came here. I thought maybe if I learned how to move again, even just in water, I could start living again. His words hit deeper than I expected. I realized I'd been doing the same, floating through life, waiting for something to pull me forward. That we swam a few laps in silence before he suddenly stopped in the middle of the pool and looked at me. "You helped," he said simply. "Helped with what?" "With remembering how it feels to be seen," he replied. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. There was no hidden meaning in his words, only honesty, and somehow, that made them heavier. That we sat at the pool's edge again, feet in the water, the sky now turning deep blue. The hum of night began to rise around us. "I'm leaving next week," Aaron said quietly. "Work transfer. It's sudden." The words landed like a stone dropped into still water, small at first, but spreading wider with every second that I tried to keep my voice steady. "So this is it, then?" He smiled softly. "Not it. Just another beginning." I wanted to say more, to tell him that this pool wouldn't feel the same without him, that his presence had somehow rewired the way I looked at simple things. But the words refused to form. Instead, I said, "You'll come back, right?" He didn't promise. He just looked at me, eyes steady and kind. "Maybe. But even if I don't, I think some people never really leave." We sat there for a long time, the quiet stretching comfortably between us. When he finally stood to go, he turned and added, "Keep swimming. Don't stop." And then he was gone. The week after he left, the pool felt different. The water still shimmered in the sun, but the silence was louder now. I still came every evening, out of habit at first, and then because it felt right, like keeping a part of something alive. That I remembered our talks, about stillness, about starting again, about rain and blessings. They lingered like echoes in the air. One evening, as I floated on my back, watching the stars blink into view, I realized something Aaron had been trying to tell me all along. Life doesn't always give us permanence, but it gives us moments, and sometimes, a single moment can change the direction of everything that follows. That I smiled at the thought, feeling the water cradle me. The loneliness I used to feel had softened into something else, not sadness, but gratitude. Gratitude for connection, for kindness, for the reminder that even brief encounters can leave lifelong ripples. When I stepped out of the pool that night, I looked back once more at the still surface. For a second, I could almost imagine him there, that easy smile, the sound of his laughter mixing with the water. Maybe he was right. Some people never really leave. That I took a deep breath and whispered into the quiet air, "See you tomorrow." The words floated away, carried gently by the evening breeze, and though I was alone, the world didn't feel empty anymore.